Welcome to Finance in 5. With the current lockdown preventing people from earning wages, many savers are simply looking to protect and grow what remains of their investments. Interest rates are negative though, so what choices are out there? Today, we're looking at 5 companies, each with a proven track record of growth even during dark times. Not only will the shares appreciate, but in the meantime, you can live off or reinvest the dividends. Coming up today on Finance in 5. Let's get straight into it. Brookfield Infrastructure Partners. BIP is a partnership that buys and operates infrastructure assets around the world, which are naturally wide moat businesses. They have a return on invested capital that averages 13% based on adjusted funds from operations and partnership capital. And due to their partnership structure, they can grow far more quickly than standard utility companies can. A 2016 report by the worldwide management consultancy firm McKinsey & Company found that the world needs $49 trillion in infrastructure spending between now and the end of 2030. It has been a chronic area of underinvestment. The report says the world needs to invest an average of $3.3 trillion annually just to support the currently expected rates of growth. Emerging economies will account for some 60% of that need. Here is the current map of operations for BIP. They own natural gas pipelines, electricity transmission and toll roads in South America, freight rail, ports and logistics in Australia, telecommunications towers in Europe and India, and various other utilities throughout Europe and North America. Most of their cash flows are contracted for the long term, and they build inflation hedges into most of their contracts. These assets are long-lived, cash flow producing machines. They pay out 50 to 70% of their cash to shareholders in dividends, while investing whatever remains left over into growth. And not very much growth is actually needed in order to produce excellent returns. The partnership currently offers a 4% yield and expects to grow that distribution at a 6 to 9% rate per year going forward, which translates into 10 to 13% of annualized returns. In the past, they have beaten their estimates, and unlike most major limited partnerships, however, they are not particularly tax efficient. Their taxes are a little bit confusing because of the fact that they have this global nature. As long as this company costs less than $45 per share, it's a buy, and right now it's priced far lower than that. Texas Instruments. This isn't just a company that was name dropped in the movie The Wolf of Wall Street.
Texas Instruments at 11 and took you out at 47.
It's also a genuinely profitable business and one of the world's largest producers of analog semiconductor products. After years of diversified business under the leadership of current CEO Rich Templeton, Texas Instruments divested from some non-core business areas to focus almost entirely on analog chips and embedded systems. Analog chips have got a variety of applications, which include converting real-world signals like temperature, pressure, sound, and images into information that's actually usable inside digital circuits. Analog chips are often difficult to design, but they tend to have very, very long product life cycles of up to a decade or more. So as a result, they are incredibly profitable, often with gross margins of over 50%. In addition, the analog industry is highly fragmented because there are countless different types of analog chips for countless different types of applications. Texas Instruments' large portfolio of analog designs gives it a wide and diversified economic moat in a growing industry. Embedded systems, on the other hand, are like mini computers inside a variety of everyday equipment. Microcontrollers are hardware devices that can be programmed to perform a variety of complex tasks. Like analog chips, embedded systems tend to have fairly long product life cycles and high profit margins. Texas Instruments stands to benefit from the increasing levels of technology in our lives. Smart and connected devices, self-driving cars, sensors and controllers embedded in just about everything. While Texas Instruments is on the high side of the valuation spectrum, the high return on investment capital, strong balance sheet and major industry tailwinds justify the valuation in my humble opinion. The company generates major levels of free cash flow that it gives back to investors in the form of growing dividends and share buybacks, and the company produces returns on invested capital of at least 20% in most years. Not everybody is going to agree with it, but Texas Instruments is once again showing a willingness to break from the pack during this downturn, learning lessons from prior downturns when unexpected recoveries in demand caused production difficulties and headaches for consumers. Texas Instruments is choosing to invest in inventory and to keep production levels relatively high. If this strategy pays off, particularly if there's a more V-shaped recovery, Texas Instruments could gain share at the expense of rivals that don't have the balance sheets to do this. Ventas. Ventas is a real estate investment trust that operates a diverse and growing portfolio of healthcare properties. They don't have the highest dividend yield around, but they have a great combination of yield and growth. Importantly, they already divested their assets that have large exposure to government healthcare funding sources, which means that if you're an American, you don't really have to pay very much attention to politics in Washington to feel secure about this investment, since almost all of their assets derive their revenue from private payers. Let's check out their portfolio. The stock of Ventas recently fell from $70 per share to less than $22, which is even more of a bargain than ever. Their most recent 52-week high and all-time closing high was last year when they closed at $75.23 on September the 6th, 2019. That's a 70% slide in price to their April the 3rd, 2020 close of $22.52. I mean, my personal perspective is that Ventas has got a very strong management team. The CEO, Deb Caffaro, and her team can navigate the proper course through this coronavirus storm, in my humble estimation. I would consider that the balance sheet is in excellent shape before this crisis, and it still is now. Ventas has a net asset value of at least $31 per share. They should trade around 15% of a premium compared to the net asset value when their earnings re-enter the growth mode. Many are thinking at this point, this company has tanked 70%. How am I supposed to believe that it's going to rise all of a sudden? Well, we have to have a look at the reasons why it tanked. Its headquarters are in Chicago. Ventas, what does it own? It owns hospitals, medical office buildings, long-term acute care facilities, research and life science assets, as well as skilled nursing facilities and senior housing. And senior housing is what constitutes 62% of Ventas's portfolio by investment dollars. It is likely that the performance from and exposure to these senior housing assets has caused most of Ventas's stock decline. As of June 2019, Ventas announced that they were investing $1.5 billion in a joint venture that would own 31 senior housing communities and 4 development projects in Quebec. A lot of this was financed with a follow-on offering of stock priced at $62.75 per share, and that raised $794 million of proceeds before bankers' fees. With the October 2019 earnings price release, it became apparent that many of Ventas's legacy senior living assets were not living up to expectations. Fears began to arise that the newly acquired senior communities would go the same way, and Ventas's shares took a bit of a hit and then seemed eventually to stabilize around the mid-50s level up until February 2020. Around about that time, the COVID-19 pandemic began disproportionately to affect the elderly population, which is just exactly the type of tenant that would most likely to be found in a senior living facility. New fears arose that the virus would not only slow the rate of new residents moving into these senior facilities owned by Ventas, but also that it had the potential to affect existing residents, which would create vacancy at such properties. This news, along with massive repricing of risk across all asset classes pretty much, led to the Ventas stock slide, which appears to have bottomed on March the 18th. But I still think, as do many analysts, that Ventas has got a strong balance sheet. Ventas sports a dividend yield above 10%. There's always the potential for a dividend cut during difficult times, but we should remind ourselves of the fact that Ventas did not cut their dividend between 2007 and 2010, when most real estate investment trusts did. Even if Ventas is subject to a dividend cut this time around, which would be understandable given the uncertainty surrounding COVID-19 and senior housing, keep in mind that the total return comprised of dividend distributions and stock price appreciation is what really matters over the long term. So I would expect Ventas and their assets to outlive the COVID-19 pandemic and to return to a growth profile in the very near future. Starbucks coffee. After many years of market-crushing performance, Starbucks, the coffee giant, has finally transitioned from being a growth stock into being a value stock. In recent years, they've lowered their forward growth guidance, albeit still with a rather large growth rate, and they've boosted their dividends and share buybacks. So in other words, less focus on investing in growth and a greater focus on giving money back to shareholders. They're likely poised for strong returns once again from a carefully concocted brew combining moderate growth with overseas expansion. With the market saturated in North America, Starbucks is focused on expanding to the rest of the world with an emphasis on China. With China's massive 1.4 billion population and growing middle class, Starbucks management expects to eventually have more Starbucks locations in China than it does in the United States. If that ends up being true, that's a lot of money to be made. Starbucks is also moving up the quality chain with Reserve Roastery locations. The first Starbucks Reserve Roastery opened in their hometown of Seattle, and it has been extremely profitable. It's a 15,000 square foot, nicely designed location that's a little bit like the Willy Wonka of coffee. Customers spend 4 times as much there compared to the amount that they spend at normal Starbucks venues because of the fact that the Reserve Roastery offers a variety of premium foods and drinks along with a high-end visual setting that marks it out as a quality destination for the coffee connoisseur. So after the success of their first Reserve Roastery opening, they opened a flagship 30,000 square foot Reserve Roastery in Shanghai in China, which has been another huge success. It makes about 10 times as much money as a standard Starbucks location through a combination of higher prices and more customers coming through the doors. Finally, they opened one in Milan, Italy, which was a little bit daring of them given the fact that Italy has an enormous reputation for coffee. And why would Starbucks compete with that? Nevertheless, the location proved to be extraordinarily popular as well. Then they opened one in Chicago, New York, and other cities, and each roastery location generates profits equal to several normal locations because of the large size of the roasteries and the high prices charged, and most major cities around the world probably could support at least one of these premium roastery locations. Starbucks has got a powerful brand. Its massive scale gives it enormous bargaining power with its suppliers. This is slightly offset by the fact that customers have got low switching costs. If Starbucks makes a major misstep that hurts the brand, then customers can easily switch to other coffee shops, and many prefer to support independent outlets or non-chain retailers of coffee. Starbucks' balance sheet is pretty decent. It produces tremendous amounts of free cash flow, and that covers their debt interest expense many times over. Their book value is low because the company generates high returns on invested capital compared to their assets. Their excellent debt-to-income ratio is less than 1 times, meaning that they could pay their long-term debt off with about 1 year's worth of net income. However, Starbucks has been borrowing a little bit more lately, so credit ratings agencies have mildly downgraded its credit rating. Travelers companies. Travelers is one of the largest publicly traded insurance companies in the United States, and it's a component of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The company has not had much revenue growth over the past decade, and due also to low interest rates and how competitive insurance is, but yet their stock has given tremendous shareholder returns over that same exact time period. Dividends per share, earnings per share, and book value per share. They've all seen excellent gains, even as the size of the company itself has stayed reasonably flat. This is because of the fact that the Travelers company gives almost all of their money back to shareholders in the form of dividends and share buybacks, as well as paying a dividend yield of over 2%, which isn't amazing, but it's not bad. They also buy back between 5 and 10% of their existing shares every single year, year on year, meaning that your shares are going to be worth about 5 to 10% more of the company. Normally, share buybacks aren't particularly lucrative, but in Travelers' case, they have a price-to-earnings ratio of only about 12, so their buybacks are extremely lucrative and they are performed regularly like clockwork. They're also an extremely resistant to recession type business. If you look at the long-term stock price from that time, you wouldn't really know that 2008 to 2009 actually saw the worst recession in modern history. I'd be fairly bullish on this stock at less than $140 per share. They're giving back 15% premiums to their policyholders as well. I mean, the business model for insurance here is pretty simple. Customers pay a premium for a level of insurance. Insurance companies then invest those proceeds. Then they estimate an allowance for claims and losses based on recent performance. They use that to predict what future losses may be with their current customer base. Insurance companies do a lot better than expected when losses and claims are lower than what they estimate them to be. During the coronavirus, there has been less opportunity for accidents and for other business accidents, primarily due to the stay-at-home orders and the fact that most businesses have their doors shut or production facilities are at a standstill. So let's take a look at the first quarter 2020 performance of Travelers companies. It was able to deliver the 15% discount to customers. It sped up payments of commissions to their agents and brokers, and it also donated $5 million to the Coronavirus Relief Fund. They did all this, all while delivering strong performance for the first quarter, showing net income of $600 million and a growth in top-line revenue. Premiums were up almost $400 million for this quarter versus last year's first quarter. Despite incurring additional costs for salaries, benefits back to their customers, they still showcase $600 million in net income, or $2.34 in earnings per share for the quarter. Add to that, their balance sheet's strong, which is highly important during any pandemic. They've got $76.7 billion in investments alone. Giving back to their customers, to the relief fund, and to employees isn't the only cash flow that they're giving out. The board also declared a 4% dividend increase during the first quarter earnings release. And this was Travelers Company's 17th consecutive year of dividend increases. And doing this during this time is another stroke of confidence in their business model. It's getting another year closer to the illustrious 25-year consecutive mark, and that's going to make them a dividend aristocrat, effectively. The final thoughts are that buying and holding any of the above 5 blue chip dividend stocks can be a smart move for hands-on investors to ensure reliable investment income. The best dividend stocks tend to be those that are consistently growing their dividends like clockwork, cover their dividend well by both net income and free cash flow, have a strong balance sheet, generate a high return on investment capital, and have a moat around them to keep it that way, and have a dividend yield and dividend growth rate of at least 10%. Let me know what you think. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.